Trump attorney John Sauer, I think that's how you say his name, argued with a straight face in a court of law that a sitting president could literally order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate their political rival and still be immune from prosecution, with one exception. Now, it's an insane hypothetical, of course, but it is in fact relevant to the specifics of Jack Smith's election interference case against Donald Trump. Now, Trump's lawyers have argued that the broad legal immunity presidents are widely presumed to enjoy while in office extends to criminal cases filed against them after they leave office. They also contend that because Trump was acquitted by the Senate after his 2021 impeachment over some of the same issues raised in the criminal case, he cannot be prosecuted. Now, I want to dispel the notion that impeachment proceedings in Congress are the same as actual legal proceedings, because clearly the political proceedings that an impeachment falls under is really about ousting someone from their position of power. It is not a literal court of law. I think most people should be able to understand that, but I commend the Trump legal team for trying this legal argument out. I don't think it's gonna work, but for the purposes of this discussion, we should delve into the argument that Donald Trump should be able to do whatever he wants and enjoy presidential immunity after he leaves office. Now, yesterday, Trump posted this on Truth Social, in all caps, of course. Without immunity, it would be very hard for a president to enjoy his or her golden years of retirement. They would be under siege by radical, out of control prosecutors, much like I am, but without the retirement. Now, look, I do think that there is a downside to some of the threats of legal action against Trump before his term was over. Because think about what that does to the mind of someone like Donald Trump. If he knows that he is likely going to face prosecution after he leaves office, well, then he's not gonna wanna leave office. Now, his efforts to remain in office, despite the fact that he lost the election, I think had to do with more than just the legal repercussions he was going to be confronted with after his term was over. But nonetheless, I do think that presidential immunity to some extent is important. The question is, when do you cross a line? And I would venture to say attempting to go against the will of the American people, the American voters, and essentially overturn the results of our democratic process should not enjoy immunity. And look, even though the judges haven't made a decision on this yet, I do think that they're likely going to rule against Trump and the argument that's being made here. Now, Jack Smith is warning that if Trump's argument stands, then presidents could literally avoid legal consequences for nearly anything they do so long as they claim it was an official act while in office. And that's the other thing. When it comes to immunity, it has to do with the actions that the president takes when he's president of the United States, pertaining to policy, pertaining to his duties as president. In the case of trying to overturn the results of the election, obviously that has nothing to do with official presidential duties. And to be sure, US District Judge Tanya Chutkan did not side with Trump on that argument. In a December opinion, Chutkan wrote that his presidency did not bestow on him the divine right of kings to evade the criminal accountability that governs his fellow citizens. And so the Trump team appealed that decision, and that brings us to the court proceedings that took place in the appeals court just yesterday. Judge Florence Pan, one of the 3 judges on the Washington, D.C. appeals court panel, basically wanted to test the limits of Trump's absolute immunity argument by posing a series of hypotheticals. And so let's hear how that exchange went.
Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? That's an official act in order to SEAL Team 6?
He would have to be and would speedily be, impeached and convicted before the criminal prosecution.
What if he weren't? There would be no criminal prosecution, no criminal liability for that?
Chief Justice's opinion in Marbury against Madison and our constitutional tradition and the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause all clearly presuppose that what the founders were concerned about was not.
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is
no. My answer is qualified, yes.
John, the answer was qualified. The answer was qualified. What do you think about that qualification?
Yeah, I think the answer was qualified. He doesn't seem to be, like, to engage in this legal process that he's involved in. It's utter madness. I mean, look, I guess I give him credit to sticking to his crazy guns. Like, she laid out a hypothetical that for any reasonable person would cause you to back off, but he's in for a penny, in for a fascist takeover of the American government. And so he's like, yeah, I guess. I mean, but no, don't worry. The Senate would just impeach and convict him, which means that your crazy plan for the president to assassinate a rival of SEAL Team 6 would not work. He would have to kill his political rival and also kill enough of the Senate that they wouldn't have a quorum and they couldn't convict him. And there would literally be no way to try him for the murder of, let's say, 50 senators because the Senate wouldn't be able to convict him. Or hell, you just kill a whole bunch of the House of Representatives as well, then he can't even be impeached. So it really, look, it requires SEAL Team 6 to be busy. You know, they're gonna have to put in the hours, probably overtime. But if they kill enough of his political rivals, then I guess he, by definition, cannot be convicted. This is utter madness. It's madness to, normally we confront this sort of madness and think, well, for us, for any reasonable person, how is this what they're saying? In this one case, as you acknowledge, the judges also don't seem to be buying it. There are other aspects of how they've tried to argue for this immunity that I think are utterly ridiculous and illogical. But I'm glad that we have focused on the hypotheticals because I don't think almost anyone, except the most diehard conservative who dreams of Trump being a literal king, I don't think almost anyone, including conservatives, want Joe Biden to have this sort of power, or like they didn't want Barack Obama to have this sort of power. And I know that we can't expect consistency out of them, but who wants to live in a system that we would have if the judges buy what this guy's trying to sell? Yeah,
you're exactly right. And I would just invite Trump supporters, listen, you support Trump, that's totally fine, I guess, right? But I want you to just consider, I want them to consider if the shoe were on the other foot, because what they would do in allowing for this ridiculous protection for their preferred presidential candidate, Donald Trump, is they would create a precedent that wouldn't just simply apply to Donald Trump, it would apply to any president in the executive branch. And so if the shoe were on the other foot and we were having a conversation about Joe Biden or Barack Obama right now, would they sign on to the idea that the president would enjoy immunity regardless of what he did and regardless of whether or not his actions had anything to do with official White House business? And I would venture to say, no, they would not co-sign to that. They would not agree to that. And so you don't want to open those floodgates, and you have to think a little ahead of what you would be creating in this country and how you would essentially provide so much more power to the executive branch, to the government. The very government that oftentimes they're unhappy with. It's so short-sighted. And look, John, you think it doesn't appear that the judges are going to rule in Trump's favor, but one of his other attorneys, Alina Habba, disagrees. She thinks that this argument is an absolute slam dunk. Here she is defending the notion that Trump is protected by presidential immunity.
I've argued presidential immunity, Martha, ad nauseum because I represent the most targeted former president in American history. I can tell you right now, absolute immunity, or what we call presidential immunity, is an immunity that exists to not only protect presidents, but protect Americans. And that was the arguments that we heard today. If you all of a sudden change an immunity that has been in place forever, that has been in place for very good reason, then how are presidents to protect the country? How are presidents to speak to the press and address the nation when they're afraid of defamation in civil claims, when they're afraid of criminal charges for having military take action against our enemies? It is hypothetical after hypothetical of extreme situations that are not the current situation. That's what I heard today.
Right, but Trump trying to steal the election is not a hypothetical, and that is extreme, and he did engage in that. And so the question is, should he be protected from any prosecution simply because he was the former president of the United States, even though the actions he engaged in had nothing to do with official White House duties as president of the United States. It was really about his self-interest in wanting to dismantle our democracy in order to remain in power. John.
Yeah, look, it's ridiculous that we need to argue in this in multiple different ways. As you pointed out, they would not want this to apply to a Democratic president. They don't believe that it applies to Democratic presidents. They don't believe that it applies to Joe Biden. Literally right now, Alina Habba would ask, okay, so can Biden, okay, here's the idea. Donald Trump is the leader of the MAGA movement. Okay, Joe Biden's getting old. He doesn't think that he can beat Trump. So, according to you, Joe Biden can have SEAL Team 6 go and kill Donald Trump. Oh, but wait, then he'll be impeached by the House, convicted by the Senate, and he could potentially be tried. Well, then he simply has SEAL Team 6 kill Donald Trump. He then resigns. Okay, he cannot be impeached by definition now, so he can never be charged. He gets away with it scot-free, and Harris becomes president or whatever, or Buttigieg or what. Like, they don't believe any of the things that they're saying. It's utter madness, as you point out. It has nothing to do with his official duties to call up Brad Raffensperger and say, I need you to get me 11,041 votes or whatever. Sending a mob of people to the Capitol has absolutely nothing to do with his official duties. None of this does. They don't believe any of it. They just have to say it because they're presumably being paid. I don't know for sure that they're being paid. Donald Trump is their boss, so they might not well get that check at the end. But they believe they'll be paid to say things that are utterly insane.
I mean, that they are the attorneys, right? So I don't begrudge them for saying the crazy things that they're saying, both in that courtroom and also during these press interviews. And again, this is what they're paid to do, so this is what they're doing. But what I do care deeply about is the interpretation of presidential immunity by the judges. And I do think that there is some importance in protecting immunity where it actually matters and where immunity actually applies. And I'm happy to say that even though we don't know what the final decision is going to be by this court, it does appear that the judges are considering how to handle this unprecedented situation in which they maintain the importance and protections of presidential immunity while also dealing with the unprecedented nature of Donald Trump engaging in these efforts to essentially overturn the results of the election in our democratic process. So for instance, Judge Florence Pan said that dismissing the Trump prosecution would have its own set of ill effects on the nation, like weakening the enforcement of criminal laws or diminishing the Constitution's guarantee that executive power will be vested in a duly elected president. So the judges wondered whether they should issue a blanket decision or a narrower ruling that focused on the specifics of Smith's charges against Trump. Henderson asked whether the panel should consider sending the matter back to Tanya Chutkan, the original judge who said that the immunity doesn't apply here, and directing her to determine which of the charges and acts cited in the indictment against Trump are plausibly related to his official duties. So rather than speculate on that, we'll wait to see how this story develops. But for now, it seems like things aren't looking so great for Trump and his legal team in making this argument that he should be protected and immune from any prosecution, even when it comes to going against the will of the American people, the American voters, and attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.